Welcome to today's webinar, Lessons from Lime Data, How Cities Can Use Shared Micromobility Data for Transportation Planning and Policy. Next slide. My name is Amelia Neptune, and I'm the director of the Bicycle Friendly America program. And today, we're really happy to be hosting this webinar, and just a couple housekeeping notes for everyone. Before we get started with our speakers, we are recording this and we'll be posting the recording on the League's YouTube channel and on our webinar archive, and also at bikeleague.org/lime. Closed captions are available. For those of you watching live, you can turn those on or off at any time, following the instructions on your screen. And you are more than welcome to type in questions into the Q&A at any time, and we should have time for some questions and answers at the end, and I'll be moderating those. Next slide. And today, I'm really happy to be joined by this awesome lineup of speakers representing Lime and the cities of Bloomington, Indiana, and Washington, DC. We've got a really great representation of different roles across the transportation sector, in addition to two really cool different gold-level bicycle-friendly communities, and then, of course, our policy experts at Lime. So I'm thrilled in a few minutes that you'll get to hear from all of the people on the screen here. But first, if we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the League and sort of set the stage for why we wanted to partner with Lime on this project. So a little bit of history about the League. We are a national nonprofit bike advocacy organization. We have been doing this work since 1880, originally founded to advocate for the very first paved roads in the nation as the League of American Wheelmen. And our name has changed, our mission has changed slightly, but we are still leading the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. And we do that through advocacy at the federal level and supporting grassroots advocacy on the ground. You can go ahead to the next slide, Calvin, thanks. And then the program I run is the Bicycle Friendly America program, where we evaluate and give feedback to communities, businesses, and universities. And we also rank all 50 states every couple of years on how bicycle friendly those entities are. Next slide. And the Bicycle Friendly Community Program specifically has been around since the 1990s. And to date, we have 480 bicycle friendly communities in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And the framework of this program is meant to be really comprehensive. So we look at infrastructure, we look at data, we look at programming, we look at the outcomes as well as the inputs and all the different things that it takes to make a place where people feel safe, comfortable, and welcome on bicycles. Next slide. The BFC program is really designed to be both a recognition tool and a feedback mechanism, so that local advocates can point to it to say, here's all the things we need to do to improve, whether you're a platinum level community, a gold level community, or whether you applied and got honorable mention or no award at all. Everybody gets feedback, and those that meet our criteria get awards, bronze through platinum. Next slide. And one of the things that we've learned over the course of the many years that we've run this program is that the importance of data cannot be understated. Data is key to making the case as advocates and to understanding sort of where we are. And it's one of the reasons we've partnered with the CDC for many years through their Active People Healthy Nation initiative to run the benchmarking report. This is a benchmarking of walking and biking data across the United States. You can learn more at data.bikeleague.org. But this is a wealth of information around different sources of publicly available data, looking at the policies and the activities that places are doing and the outcomes, what we're seeing in terms of ridership, in terms of health outcomes, et cetera. So invite you all, if you're on this webinar today because you're interested in data, just wanted to invite you to check out that resource. Next slide. And that importance of data brings us to the reason we partnered with Lime. Lime is, as you know, a great service to bring bikes and scooters to cities all across the country. But more importantly, they are also partners in helping places become more bicycle friendly. And one of the ways that they can do that is they have extensive data on their ridership and the usage of their vehicles. And we were really excited when they came to us with this idea of using this data, showcasing what cities can learn, looking at different kinds of considerations like how people park, where they ride, how they behave when they're using a Lime bike or a Lime scooter. And so we set out to sort of ask some tough questions and look at the data and see what we could learn. So we opened up a competition to any community that was a bicycle-friendly community that had Lime, and the list of communities that fit that criteria was about 30 or 40 communities long. We received applications from all over the country. And next slide. We were very excited earlier this summer to announce that Bloomington, Indiana, and Washington, DC were the awardees for this competition. So those are the two communities that you'll be hearing about today that are highlighted in the report that we are releasing today in partnership with Lime. And I just want to sort of highlight the fact that both of these communities have been active participants in the Bicycle Friendly Community Program since 2003. Both of them have worked their way up since then from bronze to their current gold level status, which for me is a sign that they have been working hard to make improvements for many, many years, literal decades now. But a few things that set them apart is the sort of size and geography of these two places. So DC has a population of almost 700,000 people. Bloomington is just under 80,000 people, very much a college town. And so when you think about how the lessons learned from these two places might apply to your community, keep that in mind, that these are two pretty different communities, and the lessons we learned from both of them have a lot of overlapping commonality. So I'm excited to hand it over now to Calvin from Lime to kick us off with telling us more about the research that they did and the data that they found using Lime data from these two cities. So Calvin, I will turn it over to you now. Thanks.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Calvin Thickman, and I'm Lime's Director of Policy Research. And before coming to Lime, I earned my PhD in Transportation Technology and Policy at UC Davis, where I studied bicyclist behavior and policy. And so that was about 6 years ago, and I've been at Lime ever since. And so I'm really excited to talk today about the Mobility Insights competition. This is our partnership with the League, as well as DC and Bloomington. But before I do, just wanted to provide a quick introduction to Lime for those of you who are not familiar with us. Lime is a global leader in shared electric micromobility. We operate in nearly 300 cities across 5 continents. Lime was also the first shared micromobility company to reach profitability, which is something we've achieved over the last 2 years. And that's really established us as a solid, dependable partner for cities. And at Lime, as the Director of Policy Research, I lead our external research collaborations on topics ranging from sustainability to equity to parking. And so what this report really focuses on, and the goal of the competition in general, was to partner with 2 US cities to demonstrate the power and the potential of Lime's data to help answer questions that are specific to shared micromobility, but also to address topics that go beyond just shared bikes and shared scooters. So how are bike infrastructure investments paying off in terms of ridership and in terms of safety? Where are more bike lanes needed? Where is more bike parking needed to meet the increasing demand for active transportation? And what are safety trends? And how can we identify areas of opportunity and then act on that? And so what I'll be sharing today is the result of the hard work of myself and my colleagues, Brandon Haydu, who is Lime's Director of Transportation Policy and Analytics, and Marissa Cruz, who is our Policy Research Intern, who over the last several months have taken a really deep dive into Lime's data for DC and Bloomington to uncover the insights we'll be sharing. And so I really wanted to thank Brandon and Marissa for their dedication. A lot of work went into what I'll be sharing here. I also want to applaud DC and Bloomington. They've been fantastic partners throughout. They also really stood out. We received half dozen to a dozen applications to this competition, and their applications really stood out as being very forward-thinking, and they demonstrated that they wanted to think about how Lime data could be used more broadly. And so I'll be sharing a portion of the report, which again is being released today. I'll be focusing on the impacts of bike lanes, and then I'll pass it off to our city partners to share the results for parking and safety respectively. So really, as briefly as possible and as high level as possible, I'll go through the methods that we undertook here. So the first thing we did is we tallied up all of the Lime trips that were taken on every single street in both cities over the past 5 years. And so you can see that here on the map. You can see the red lines. They're indicating how many trips were taken on each street. So dark red means more trips were taken. This is DC, to be clear. And light red indicates that fewer trips were taken. The next step we took was, because we were curious about how bike lane installations affected Lime ridership, we needed to know which streets had bike lanes. And so not only did we need to know that, we needed to know when they were installed. And so that's when we turned to our city partners at DC and Bloomington, and they provided us with data on their bike lane installations, which we then fused with our trip data. And then last but not least, once we had all that data cleaned and processed, we could finally analyze changes in trip volumes over time. And just one sort of final important note is we wanted to make fair apples to apples comparisons. So again, we were really focused on these new bike lanes that were installed between 2019 and 2024. And what we wanted to do is carefully select similar streets that were nearby, that were as common as possible on other attributes, number of lanes, car traffic lanes, posted speed limits, but that differed on a key aspect, whether they had a bike lane or not. And so you can see on this map, the light green dots are the streets that had bike lanes added during the pandemic. The blue dots indicate streets with no bike lanes, and the dark green are streets that had pre-existing bike lanes prior to the pandemic. So in the slides to come, I'll share the results of these comparisons across these different street types, first for DC and then for Bloomington. So the data in the graph here shows how much Lime trip volumes changed between 2019 and 2024, again in DC, on those 3 different types of streets. And so I'll draw your attention to the pale green bar on the left side. As it shows, the average street segment with no bike lane saw a 360% increase in trip volumes between 2019 and 2024. This reflects a lot of the changes that were afoot with the DC's shared micromobility program. The fleet sizes have grown by several times over. So that's why you're seeing such huge increases in trip volumes. So we'll treat that pale green bar as sort of our baseline for the purposes of comparing streets where a bike lane was added after 2019. And those streets are shown in the dark green bar. On those streets where a bike lane was installed during the pandemic, trip volumes increased by twice as much as on similar streets with no bike lanes. So this is a very clear demonstration of how much Lime riders prefer to use dedicated bike infrastructure. You can see this preference in a slightly different format in this graph as well. It's just a different way of displaying sort of the same data. So if you focus on the gray bars in this graph, these indicate what percentage of streets in DC have a bike facility and what percentage do not. So you can see 1 in 10 DC streets have a bike lane, while the remaining 90% do not. Now, what we wanted to do was contrast that with Lime trip volumes. So if Lime riders didn't really care where they took their trips, we would expect the green bars to be at similar levels as the gray bars. But that's clearly not the case. 40% of Lime trips were taken on streets with bike facilities, even though only 10% of streets had a bike facility available. So that's a 4-to-1 difference. Again, another way of demonstrating this clear preference for safe, dedicated infrastructure. And then switching gears and moving over to Bloomington, we took a slightly different approach for this analysis in Bloomington. We wanted to focus in particular on the city's new 7 line. So this is a new protected bike lane. You can see here on the right in the photo that Hank Duncan provided. This was installed in Bloomington during the pandemic. And we wanted to really focus on this because it's a protected bike lane. And so again, we compared it to nearby streets that had similar characteristics, but did not have a bike lane in the case of East 3rd Street, and already had a painted bike lane in the case of North Walnut Street. On those comparison streets, Lime trip volumes increased by about 20 to 30% between 2020 and 2024, while in contrast, the 7 line saw Lime trips double over that same time period, which is, again, a 5 times larger increase than what was seen on these other streets. We wanted to look at this because, again, it's a protected bike lane, and we think this data really speaks to the special role that protected bike lanes play. You know, riders feel safer and more comfortable on these lanes, as this study shows and as lots of academic research has shown. And they're communicating that preference very clearly in the routes that they choose in Bloomington. And then zooming out, again, similarly as DC, this is now looking at all Bloomington streets. We again wanted to compare how much of the city's streets had bike lanes or not. And then again, where were Lime trips taken? And we see a very similar pattern. In this case, a quarter of Bloomington streets had a bike facility. It's an encouraging number, but it's still a minority of streets. And in contrast, nearly 3 in 5 Lime trips were taken on bike facilities, which is a majority of trips. So again, a very clear demonstration of preference for bike infrastructure by Lime riders. And so I'll end with some high-level takeaways from looking across these 2 cities. First, people want to ride on bikes, on bike lanes. This is true, no matter whether you're looking at a large metropolitan area or a small university town, these preferences are very much universal. Another thing we see is that adding a bike lane dramatically increases ridership. In DC, we observed a doubling of the increase on streets where bike lanes were added. And in Bloomington, again, we saw that 5x increase where a protected bike lane was installed. And these investments pay off, right, with a number of benefits. I know, probably most of the crowd here already knows about these benefits. Academic research shows that bike lanes have strong rider safety benefits. We also know that bike lanes help cities meet their sustainability goals by getting people out of cars and onto 2-wheeled options. And then more specifically to shared micromobility, academic research also shows that streets with bike lanes have 72 to 76% lower rates of sidewalk riding. So this ends up providing a safer environment for all travelers, pedestrians, bicyclists, scooter riders alike. And so I'll conclude with 2 final points. First, the fact that we can show these increases in ridership in both of these cities is really in large part thanks to the efforts of Ted, Hank, Renee, Andrea, and their many colleagues and partners at the City of Bloomington and Washington, DC. We saw a huge increase in the fleet, the 400% increase in fleet availability in DC. This is just DC specifically. But we also, over that same time span, saw DC installed 41 miles of new bike lanes. They installed over 3,000 new bike racks. And all of this, again, is a sort of a rising tide lifts all boats situation. And then I'll wrap up by repeating my comments from the beginning. As you've just seen, Lime has extensive data that can lead to powerful insights. And what's so exciting is that this data is already at the fingertips of cities. So Lime already shares standardized data feeds with the cities we operate with, be it the mobility data specification or the general bike share feed specification. The data that we were just sharing and working with is already available to the cities we work with. On top of that, Lime's policy team is happy to work with our city partners to develop parking plans, identify bike lane needs, and we're just also very eager to work with cities, not only on these planning projects, but also on grant applications and things like that to help fund those infrastructure needs. So please just be in touch. And I hope you'll read the report and reach out with your thoughts, your feedback, and your ideas for how we can work together. And with that, I will pass it off to the city partners. Thank you so much.
Calvin, thank you so much. So my name is Hank Duncan. I am the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for the city of Bloomington, Indiana. With me is Andrea De La Rosa, who is the assistant director of small business development with the city. I'd like to talk a little bit about Bloomington's experience in improving its bike share program, the results of this report, but also about the broader cultural shift needed, especially within smaller communities and cities, regarding multimodal transportation. So a quick background on the city's bike and scooter share program. Last summer, so the summer of 2023, Bloomington passed regulations within its bike share program, highlighted by new parking regulations to improve pedestrian accessibility. We wanted to improve this pedestrian accessibility, reduce that street clutter, while still allowing bike and scooter share to be a viable and convenient mode of transportation around our community. With these new regulations, we built over 60 corrals in the downtown area. We utilized underutilized right-of-way spaces like yellow curb on-street areas, sidewalk bulb outs, and other areas of the sidewalk where we don't see much or any pedestrian traffic. Along with that, we partnered with Lime to create a geo-fenced area within this downtown area so scooter and bike trips could only start and end within these corrals. We're about a year past that implementation, and we've seen a rousing success, a lot of good feedback around the community, and now Lime is helping us, one, expand upon this parking program, but two, improve this current iteration of corrals, looking at locations where maybe the compliance isn't as high as we would like to be. How can we make that better? Next slide, please. The first thing that we found is that it's all about density. The closer we place corrals, especially in high-use areas, the higher parking compliance will be. Riders want to park close to their destinations, and generally, they're willing to walk about a minute or two from their parking spot to their destination. So it's our responsibility as transportation planners to accept that behavior and adapt to them and place these corrals near popular destinations. The further you get away from destinations, the less dense you place corrals, the less the compliance will be. Next slide. Now we're looking at location-specific compliance. We're not just looking at expanding this parking program, but improving existing locations. This list shows the top 10 or so locations in terms of parking compliance within the downtown area. What I want to do next is compare these locations with those at the bottom of the list, the locations with low compliance. What's the main difference between the two? What's working here that's not working there? Is it location? Is it visibility? What do we need to change? Those are the big questions moving forward. Next slide. And then finally, I've talked about expansion. There are other high-use areas of Bloomington where we can easily utilize this parking program. There are other neighborhoods and hubs where we are seeing trips start and end where we don't currently have these parking programs in place, but looking at Lime's data and looking at trip behaviors and rider behaviors, we can start to narrow and focus in on certain areas where we would like to place corrals. Where is the parking clustering happening right now? Where is the trip volume? Again, it's on us as planners to adapt to the current behavior, because if we put corrals where scooters are currently being parked, then we can help that compliance, help reduce that street clutter, and in the end, help improve that pedestrian accessibility. The goal overall is to emphasize micromobility. It's to induce this demand of sustainable and safe transportation. And the more that we can encourage this behavior, the more that bike share can become a main mode of transportation in Bloomington. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about this big versus small city culture. Bigger cities like DC, as you've seen, Chicago, Minneapolis, et cetera, are doing incredible things with the resources at hand. Bloomington and other smaller cities look to emulate what they're doing and put it in our smaller communities. But there's often a pushback in our communities by the public, elected officials sometimes, where they reject these comparisons because we're not a big city. It's comparing apples and oranges. It's a moot point if I or we agree with this statement, because for these projects to happen, we need to get these decision makers on board, right? And so I'm especially excited that Bloomington was selected for this program, because we can be that example to other smaller communities around the US to pitch their own bike share programs, to help expand their bike and scooter share programs. Bloomington is a prime example of how quickly momentum can shift in the right direction towards shared micromobility. About 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago, the city was ready to ban bike and scooter share altogether. There was an internal team put together to look at what improvements could be made. Last year, those improvements were implemented, and already that momentum has shifted into not just banning them, but expanding the program, putting more and more resources into this program, because folks are starting to realize if we can make these simple improvements to mitigate the unintended consequences, it is a viable and prioritized mode share in our community. And if we want to continue to reach those goals of safe streets for all, Vision Zero, climate change goals, then we need to continue to push for shared micromobility. All right, I'll hand it off to Dee.
My name is Andre De La Rosa. I am the Assistant Director for Small Business Development for the City of Bloomington, and my department is Economic and Sustainable Development. Why a small business person, you ask? Well, one of the major economic drivers is transportation for a small city like ours. And our department's efforts have been mainly focused on sharing qualitative and quantitative data to kind of dispel the myths about micromobility and highlighting real world advantages of these alternative forms of personal transportation. For instance, the revenue that it brings into our city to improve infrastructure for bikes and pedestrians and shared micromobility has been a boon. Calvin showed you our 7 line, which is amazing and gets used very often. And just anecdotally from residents, they really love it. And it's helping the businesses that are down there because people stop there more often. One of the surveys that we took in 2019 of the residents of Bloomington said that 41% of the micromobility riders would have otherwise driven a single occupancy vehicle. So obviously that's huge for our department because that is a boon to our sustainability efforts. Every scooter trip reduces CO2 emissions by 348 grams of carbon. And that's amazing for our Zero in Bloomington efforts. We're trying to be as sustainable as possible, and the shared micromobility is one of the things that we are pushing. It's been amazing for me. I am a micromobility user here in Bloomington. When I travel, it's one of the first modes of transportation that I look for because as a tourist, it gives me a better feel of a town, and we're trying to duplicate that feeling when tourists come to our town. One of the things that we use is slow money is spending money. So if we can get people on micromobility and taking the time to look around our town, that is a boon to our small businesses. Having that personal transportation, people having that autonomy in a town that they have never been to maybe before, it really helps our small businesses. And the parking has been so amazing in our policy change because the corrals are put in very strategic places that have been helping our businesses and helping residents and tourists find accessible and readily available transportation from destination point to destination point. Another thing is that residents find that micromobility is just way more cost effective for fluctuating fuel prices. People who are, there are students who just can't afford to have a car, can't afford to have things like that. And the micromobility is something that still gives them access to our city and the resources within our city. So how we'll use this data is really interesting, because obviously with a city, any municipality has a ton of data to just swim through and try to figure out how to use it. So what our department will be doing is using this Lime data to kind of cross-reference with our economic data to see how we get people to places they might not usually go to because of lack of personal transportation or public transportation. And where are those places? Where can we be helping our small business owners by providing parking corrals for micromobility there and placing micromobility there, so people feel that that is a place now that they can go enjoy and spend their money and spend their time. It's really exciting to see how this program has expanded. We're hoping to expand it to the neighborhoods, so it'll be even more accessible for our residents. And overall, you know, having these things out there and having people use them makes it less of a stigma, I guess, for lack of a better term. It makes it normalizes it. People are getting more accustomed to realizing that, oh, I have to share the street with a scooter or a bike, and that makes them more aware of pedestrians as well. And being able to share our transportation space is incredibly important in how we support each other and how we support our small business economy. That's all I have. So I will turn it over to Ted and Renee.
Thank you so much. My name is Ted Randall. I'm the micromobility coordinator at the District Department of Transportation here in our nation's capital. I hope everybody is experiencing better weather than we are this week, but it's great to be here again. I am joined by Renee Moore, a colleague within district government, but actually a separate agency. The Vision Zero team sits in the office of the city administrator. So we wanted to bring sort of a multi-agency perspective to things here today. My sort of day-to-day is managing the shared fleet device program, which are all of private companies that offer dockless bikes and scooters in the district, of which Lime is a participant. So when I first sort of started thinking about the context of this competition, you know, in my mind immediately went to all of the data sets that I've always wanted to get my hands on from the private operators. And it's been really great to get involved with Lime, to think about how to sort of build consensus around the concerns surrounding the shared micromobility industry, and the collective goals that private operators and cities share and can work towards together. You can go next slide, please. So safety reports were one of those data sets that I was really interested in getting my hands on immediately when we started thinking about this project. We received tons of data already from all of our operators on a monthly, daily, and even minute-by-minute basis when it comes to some of our MDS data. But it can frankly be really hard to tell the forest from the trees with some of those data sets, and it's rare that we get an opportunity to do sort of these dedicated analysis and have a team of data analysts working on this from the private sector as well. My assumption, just with increased ridership over the years, was that, you know, we would actually see an increase in incident reporting just as a sheer factor of growth of the system. But what the data suggests, that you can see on the slide in front of you, is that Lime reported incident rates have actually been decreasing as the bike lane usage has been increasing, and we've been installing more dedicated bike lanes in the district. I appreciate, as somebody who likes things to sort of fit together nicely, I guess. That you see, the nearly exact same percentage decrease in the number of incidents, and the percent change in the number of trips, which is sort of symbolic, to say that, you sort of get what you put into the system in terms of safety improvements in this case. Next slide. And, as a big agency, effectively a state DOT, we're lucky enough to have hundreds of planners, engineers, contractors, all working towards expanding our bike network, including bike lanes, micromobility corrals, bulb outs, pedestrian islands, other safety improvements, hawk signals, speed bumps, all of these things that we do on a day-to-day basis that are improving and allowing the growth of shared micromobility in general, and micromobility, privately owned devices as well. And the safe systems approach that Vision Zero brings, I think is a really good way of sort of thinking about all of these things holistically, and that's why we're really excited to have Renee on the call as well today from the Vision Zero office. Next slide. And from a programmatic standpoint, thinking about the tools that the agency typically has in our toolbox, which I'm not going to dive too far into these because I want to hand this over to Renee and with time to spare. But a lot of these tools that you see are frankly sort of blunt instruments when it comes to doing the analysis. There's a lot of time and effort and related to managing and leveraging all of this data to its full capacity. So it's great to have these opportunities to dive into the more extensive data with our private operators. Next slide. And I've spoken a few different occasions on safety issues related to shared micromobility. And I always raise the issue of data quality. I think with any crash data set or incident data set, really anything besides automobile reporting, there's underreporting. We often see miscategorizing in crash reports from police data. And often, when you have different operators in the industry collecting and disseminating their data in different ways, it can be hard to really, again, sort of pick the important things out of this. So for example, if we see if we look at this data and we see a majority of injuries or crashes occurring on our high injury network, we can continue efforts to protect vulnerable road users by installing bike lanes, by daylighting intersections and that sort of thing. But if we see that there's incidents that are all happening on the National Mall, maybe we need to rethink our education for first-time users, for tourists. We need to up our level of engagement for folks who are who are new to micromobility. And then if we see that there are safety incidents coming from Lime's data or from other operators' data that align with reports that we're getting from police departments, but they're otherwise miscategorized, maybe we need to think about our approach with MPD and how to engage better with them to improve reporting codes. And I think the next step really where we can take this data is to do a little bit more spatial analysis of this. Start to overlay these data sets and really start thinking about the network as a whole, how it relates to high injury networks, how it relates to vulnerable road users, as I mentioned. And we're just really excited and happy to continue these safety discussions. And I think with that, I think that was our DDOT's last slide. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague over at Vision Zero, Renee.
Thanks, Ted. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be Tom Renee Moore. I work in the Vision Zero office. And when we first got this data, I looked at it and I just started thinking, what could we do with it? Like kind of a wish list of things that we could do. So I want to start by talking about 5 different things I think that we could do with the help of other agencies, because of course we're a city government, we can't do it all by ourselves, but some things that I thought we could possibly do and put into practice with the help of others. So next slide, please. The first one is expanding some nighttime safety measures. So one of the things I started thinking about is that Lime scooters and are equipped with lights in both the front and the back, and there's some reflective items on it. But I also think we could probably better light some of the streets that people travel on so that they can see where they're going as well. Because it's great when people can see them for the light, but it's also good for them to be able to see if there's a pothole coming up or there's some obstruction in the street. So maybe better lit streets is one of the things that we can add to that so they can avoid obstacles and be more visible to pedestrians and to cars that are out there on the roads as well. In addition to that, there are some reflective things, but also I know Lime recommends that people wear a helmet. And so for those that wear a helmet, if that could also have a light on it, just to make it a little bit more visible, especially as we're coming up on daylight savings time when it's going to get darker a little early and stay darker longer, that this could also be a safety measure that we could implement with those that ride the scooters. Next slide. The second one, and Ted touched on this, and it was also touched on in Bloomington with Hank, is to install more bike corrals in high demand areas. If you've ever been to DC and you've ever been around the Capitol, you may notice that there are a ton of Lime bikes and scooters just sitting around. They're just all kind of gathered there. It's not even really a corral. It's just kind of like where they all happen. But this is also a great way to keep the streets tidy and make sure that they're not just laying across the sidewalk where someone who has a mobility issue, maybe they have a walker, they might be in a wheelchair, they might just be moving slowly for whatever reason, and they have to pick this item up. If they have this place where there's a corral in these high demand areas, then people, one, know where to get them, but two, they also stay out of the way. And the corrals have already proven to be a hit. We saw that in Bloomington. We're seeing that in DC. The data is showing that trips that end at corrals have increased by 60% since their installation. So it's a wonderful thing to have, is to make sure that we have more of those so that when people do ride them, they know exactly where to put them. And this is a win for everyone because pedestrians can then walk freely. The people who ride scooters know where to park them, and the city just looks better. It just looks more organized as opposed to like having to pick up bikes and scooters all over the place. Next slide. The third one, and I'm separating this just a tad. It's because it seems like it's the same as the last one I did. But I started thinking about what if there was dedicated parking with charging stations for scooters and bikes. I heard there's a few. I have not seen them, so that's why I have this in here. But to have these dedicated charging stations where people can drop it off and then the bike or the scooter can be recharged would be great. Because I don't know if you've ever picked up a scooter or bike or you've gone there and you're like, oh, it's got 2% on here, or 30%. I can't get to where I'm going. And so if they could be dropped off at a place and be charged, this could make it a lot easier for people. And much like the corrals, you have this dedicated space where the scooters can live and just be there, and they'll be out of the way. And also people won't be wondering, is this bike or scooter charged? We'll know that it's charged because it's right there at the station. The next one is expanding infrastructure. We saw from the data, both in Bloomington and in DC, that when we install bike lanes, that the scooter users use the bike lanes. And so we definitely want to consider where we're expanding bike lane infrastructure, and that this is a key enhancement to safety, and it encourages greater use of the scooters. These protected bike lanes are clear designated spaces for riders. They reduce the possibility of collisions, or the likelihood of collisions, I should say, with vehicles. And we see from the data that ridership is up when we have scooters using these bike lanes. So we definitely want to look at where else should we be installing bike lanes so that we can have more scooter uses and more micromobility usage overall. And then last but not least, and this is probably my favorite one, is more education and outreach. We find this to be a critical component to making sure that people know how to safely use scooters and bikes. We have partnered with one agency that does this, and they teach people not just how to ride bikes, but they also teach them how to ride scooters. And if that's something you haven't done in your city, it's something you may want to consider doing. It doesn't take all day to learn how to do it. It's probably 10 minutes at best, but it's something that you can do to take the time to make sure people know how to ride it safely, how to dismount, where to park it, and giving them all of those tools helps to make this a much better experience for everybody that uses it. And it doesn't have to be boring. You can definitely have classes where you have a scooter rodeo, like I mentioned, where you just get everybody together. They learn how to ride the scooters. You take them out on a ride on the street, show them how to use it, how to accelerate, how to slow down, again, where to park it. It could be in-app safety quizzes with Lime if they wanted to do something like that with incentives. We could find creative ways to reach scooter riders, partner with businesses to give discounts to people who take a Lime bike or scooter and get there to their business. So there's a lot of ways that we can do this and incorporate this into everybody's daily life. And I believe that through education and outreach, we can definitely get more people understanding how to use Lime scooters, how to use them safely, and keep our numbers where they are, because we're doing really good on scooter safety. So that's awesome, and we want to keep it that way. I am done. That's me. If you have any questions, you can email me at that address. And I'm turning it back over to Amelia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Renee. And I'm going to invite all of my panelists to join me back on camera for Q&A now. And I'm also going to put in the chat a few links. So the report that we've been referencing during the presentation today has been published today. We are so excited about this. And I really want to thank and applaud the folks at Lime for all of their work doing this data analysis and reporting and creating this really beautiful report, sharing the analysis with everyone. So the links in the chat will take you straight to the report is the first link, and then to the web page that sort of was the landing page for the competition that includes a little bit more history of how we got here. And that page will also be updated with the recording of today's webinar after this. So please bookmark those and check those out. And if you're registered for the webinar, you'll also get those via email. So now we have some time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, attendees, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box. We've gotten a few already. So I'll be asking these out loud for our panelists to answer. So I'm going to start with one that came in. This question came in before we got to the safety part of the presentation, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think there's some things to add on. So the original question was, I'm interested in whether Lime tracks data on incidents involving riders and pedestrians. What safety education is required for their riders when they open accounts? Additionally, do they monitor riders who are involved in multiple incidents? So we can start with Calvin at Lime to talk sort of generally what's required at the system level from Lime, and then how do cities customize that? And then maybe we can hear it from each city to hear about what they've done.
Yeah, that was a multi-part question. So I'll try to address the different points. Yes, we do track different incidents that our riders report, be it the rider getting in a safety incident or being involved with a pedestrian crash. We work with the police and insurance companies as well. So there's a number of different ways that we collect safety data to understand what's happening and then act on it. The second part of the question was about multiple incidents. That certainly is something we are able to track. I'm not aware of riders, this being a very common occurrence where riders get into multiple crashes on our devices. But it is possible, and we would be able to track that. And then I don't know if there's a final.
Yeah, is there anything that Lime specifically requires in terms of new user education when they sign up for the account?
Yeah, we often require, in many cities, we require riders to go through a safety training quiz. We actually partnered with the League of American Bicyclists to develop that several years ago. And we also work with cities to tailor that content, not only just safety related content, but also just generally sort of the rules of the road. How do you park properly? That differs from DC to Bloomington to the many other cities we serve. So we do include modules when riders sign up or they're new to a city. If they've just arrived in a new city, we're able to sort of bring that to their attention and make sure they're aware of the regulations in that city. And I'll pass it off to Ted and Hank to elaborate on their specific work.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm that in DC, we require that operators put users through education components, when they start an account, as part of our permit requirements, operators have to submit, detailed education plans, which include, how they're going to conduct community outreach and training of new users. I know you're not supposed to cite, studies that you don't have in front of you or can't remember the name of, but I believe, there's data that suggests that a big portion of injuries or incidents that are scooter related occur from first-time users, who are just unfamiliar with the feel of a scooter. I think anecdotally, a lot of scooter users might not necessarily be folks who are super comfortable riding a bike in a city. It's just it has sort of a lower level of entry, which is a good thing. We're inviting more people to use the service. We just have to be sort of aware of that fact. And then I also think the impact of the system and the industry's convenience can sometimes impact helmet use. If you're leaving your house, not necessarily knowing you're going to go on a scooter ride, but it becomes the most convenient option for you. You're probably not going to have a helmet on you. And the majority of scooter related hospitalizations are related to, head and neck injuries. So that's another area where we really want to be sort of focusing again our engagement efforts. Yeah, so feel free to add anything.
And just one extra thing that Lime does in Bloomington that I'm especially proud of them doing. They host in-person engagement events. So for the most part, they partner with Indiana University and their events to go on campus and come in a couple of times a year to promote safe riding. They do helmet giveaways and really reach out to the IU students to promote that safe riding.
Nice. Thanks, everybody. Question from Lime. When working on the report, did you control or explore controlling for factors such as population density, job density, or commercial activity to ensure the effects of outside trends weren't interfering with your analysis of the relationship between trips and bike lanes? And the person said, I think this is especially salient to the district where much of our bike lane infrastructure is located in close proximity to commercial corridors or the CBD. And I'll also add, we got another question in the chat about whether we looked at road volumes on questions without, or on roads without bike facilities. And so I think that's a similar sort of control question. So you can try to tackle all of that.
Yeah, so one way, it's a great question. We certainly were doing our best to control for those types of factors by deliberately, when we were looking for those control or comparison streets, to look at to compare and contrast with the new bike lanes. We wanted to make sure that, again, as I already mentioned, they had similar street characteristics, so number of lanes, posted speed limit. We also wanted them to be nearby. So we didn't, again, we wanted to be apples to apples as much as possible. So we didn't want them to be within about a quarter mile of each other, because then we might be comparing adjacent streets where people are going from, instead of taking that street, they're now just going one over. And so we'll actually see decreases on the comparison street. We want to get far enough away, but not too far away, where we're still in a similar sort of if it's a commercial district, probably still in that commercial district. So that's why we made sure that the comparison streets were within a mile, but not within a quarter mile. So a quarter mile to a mile away for both the streets with no bike lanes and the streets with pre-existing bike lanes. We did not explicitly account for those things, but that was the intention of picking those sort of nearby streets. As far as traffic volumes, we didn't have that data at our fingertips. And so no, we did not account for that. But again, to the extent that different classifications of roads tend to have similar volumes, again, that was the intent of accounting for things like speed limit and size, the width, number of lanes in the street.
And in theory, if one of the cities that you work in brought you that data and said, here's our road volume data. Can you help us look at, Lime trips on these roads? In theory, that is possible for future analysis, right?
Absolutely. And there has been other research. We were essentially following in the footsteps of other researchers who have done this type of analysis. For example, there's a University of Southern California report that took a very similar, slightly more robust approach, but very similar approach. That was from Professor Marlon Bornett, Sula Lee, and James Gross. So we're following sort of best practices as much as possible here.
Nice, thanks. Going back to the bike parking section of our presentation, Hank, could you provide the success rate of bikes being correctly placed in parking corrals?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the person said they've noticed people with disabilities often facing obstructions on sidewalks due to improper scooter and bike placement. So they'd love to hear how you've addressed that. Sorry, go ahead.
Calvin, can you go back to the slide in Bloomington section with the top 10 locations of parking compliance? So this is something, exactly. So this is something that I want to look at in more depth, because before this report, we didn't have this data. It was just based on qualitative feedback. And I think the consensus was, yes, it has improved, but to your point, how much has it improved? What is the success rate? And so what we're seeing at the top level, we're seeing, what is it, about 95% success rate, 85 to 95% success rate on the top, I would say 20% of corrals. The bottom 20%, I haven't looked at that data yet, so I'm very excited to look at the full location list of corrals, see what the compliance is, and then, as I mentioned before, go into more depth about why aren't these working, what could we do better, is it density, is it location, etc. But at the top level, we're seeing pretty high success rate. Again, it's not perfect. No system is ever perfect, but it does support that qualitative feedback that we've been getting.
Awesome. And I'll just flag for that attendee that the parking section starts on page 18 of the report. And there's a lot of even more data and graphs that you can dive into there for both cities on the topic of parking. Okay, one last question that came in on the chat. What kinds of e-scooter and e-bike availability data is publicly available? And does it include the reasons for non-availability? So Ted, if you don't mind sort of answering out loud what you had put in the chat there.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if that fully got to the heart of the question. But yes, essentially scooter availability, e-bike availability is typically public data. It's usually what you would see if you opened up your app. You would see a list of available vehicles, but the MDS data usually also shows vehicles in unavailable states, if it's in maintenance mode or if it's reserved. I think there are a few other statuses that are included in the MDS data feeds. Somebody might have a little bit stronger knowledge of that than I do, but that's sort of what I understand of it.
Awesome, thank you. All right, with 1 minute to go, I'm going to go ahead and close this out instead of have us go over time with extra questions. So again, I really want to thank all of you for speaking today and for all of the work that went into this really awesome report. We are so excited to be releasing the report today. So check out the League blog later today for the official announcement releasing the report and with the recording from today. We also we're very excited to be featured on Streets Blog USA. So thank you to them for covering this. And yeah, we just put the link in the chat for that. So yeah, look forward to hearing everybody's feedback. And again, I want to encourage cities that do have Lime to reach out to Lime to partner with them to see what kind of data you can learn from and analyze for your community to gain similar insights. And check out all of the great resources that they put out. So thank you again, Calvin and team, for all of your work on the report. And thank you to all of our excellent speakers from both cities. And thanks all of our attendees for being here today. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks for hosting, Amelia.
Thanks.
Thank you, Amelia.
Take care. Bye.